we want to switch to your test database. You go to File, Database, you'll see your district's name with a PRD and a TST. Select Test. If you've been in ESP for a while, you don't have to do this if you don't want, if you feel comfortable staying in your production. But of course, it's so easy to switch back and forth between your production. And the reason why I want to do this, because this morning I want to go ahead and kick off New Year scenarios. We'll create the 24, 25 New Year scenario. Some of you I know have already created your New Year scenario. So that's fine. But once we get it kicked off, then I want to talk about what is a New Year scenario, how it's created, what happens in the creation, because talking about that will also explain a lot about where ESP gets its data from, how to get it back into ESP. It'll cover a lot of other topics when we talk about what happens on a New Year scenario creation. So if you want to, go ahead and switch to your test database. I'm already in a test database. And remember, you can always see which database you're in. If you look in the bottom, we call this the status line down here. And it's kind of hard to see my mouse, but down here, you can see I'm in this _TST. And if you do switch, remember, well, actually what I would like for you to do is after training today, or at some point, you switch back to your production and create a New Year scenario, because you need to start creating one for the 24-25. And it's okay to go ahead and create it now, because as I'll talk about in a few minutes, you can always refresh it and update it with the latest data. So if anybody has any problems switching to test, let me know. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and talk about creating a new year. So we talked about yesterday, this toolbar button right here is called Scenario Explorer. And within Scenario Explorer, this is where you can see all of your scenarios. You can see your daily. You guys should see today's date in there. All of those snapshots, period snapshots we talked about. And then all of the scenarios that you create per fiscal year. And most of you, if you haven't created a new year, your top line will be this 23-24, which was last year's, which was used last year to create the 23-24 fiscal year adopted scenario. And we're going to talk about how to create a 24-25 New Year scenario. We talked yesterday about why we call it the fiscal base, because it's the first scenario in the fiscal year. So I'm going to talk about a New Year scenario. And talking about this New Year scenario will also help explain a lot of other features in ESP and how the data is there and why it's there. So New Year scenario discussion. I might actually do this again in a couple of weeks, just as a standalone training for everyone else, because of all the questions, I probably get this one the most about what goes on in a New Year scenario, and do I need to delete it and recreate it? And we'll go over all of that, but it is a big source of confusion for a lot of people as to what happens in a new year. Okay, I'm going to answer what it is, what happens, how to refresh it, how to delete it, but you probably don't need to. We'll look at we've already did this yesterday, explaining the column colors and the actuals, and then how to actually create it. And please feel free to ask a question. So when you create a New Year scenario, and let me show you how to create it real quick. So when we talk about creating, what I mean is you right click on your current year adopted, go to create scenario and select new year scenario. And notice it'll tell you what that fiscal year is going to be, the 24-25. Now I already did this morning, so you can see I already have a 24-25 up here. I just created it. If you have one there, you can always see when it was created. If you right click to add a column, right click up here, go to create date. You got a lot of other options here. Who created it, fiscal year. Most of this stuff you won't need, but it's there if you need to. So create date. I look at this quite often to see, okay, so I created this New Year scenario today at 9:07 this morning. So if you're working with other people and you want to know when they created it, you can always add this column to see what happens. Okay, so when you're ready to create it, when you're ready to start working, I would, hold off until you're ready to actually start working in it before you create it. It is a snapshot. When the scenario is created, it goes to Infinite Visions. It grabs your working scenario or your adopted scenario. It actually grabs both of them and brings them into the blue columns. Now I'm in my New Year scenario here, number 1. It loads the working and the adopted. Now by default, we don't show the adopted column, but it is there. Again, right click. And when you're adding a column, I want to add the adopted to the left of the working. So I right click on the left side of this column. And remember, the first question you have to ask yourself, where does this column live? The adopted is going to live in your Infinite Visions column. And then here's the adopted. But it reloads your adopted and working. No, I shouldn't say reload. In the new year, it loads your adopted and your working. And then it copies your working into your model. And that's going to be your starting point for your new fiscal year. Let me show you, let me prove that. So I'm going to show all of my objects. I don't really have to do it use this scope, but I just like to show the objects. And then I'm going to grab this working column, move it to the left. Oh, this is how to move, sorry. If you want to move a column, you just click and drag it. I'm going to scroll down and you can see this number will match this number. Now we have this thing called a delta column. So let's say I want to compare these two columns. If you left click the right column of the two columns you want to compare, you just left click to select it, not right click, just left click. It's selected now. And if you go up here to this toolbar button, it's called a delta column. It will add a delta column between the two. Of the two, it will tell you the delta between these columns. Because I want to show you that the working, except for some of these, and these are calculated in ESP. That's why they're already a little different, because there's something on the assumptions tab that, remember I told you yesterday, there's either numbers that come from Visions or we bring a number in sometimes and then we calculate something based on it. And normally those types of calculations have a icon on the left. So indirect charges and these come from the grants actually. That's why these have a delta. But anyway, this delta column is telling me the difference between these two columns. And for all of these, just flat budget items, non-salary budget items, they do match. So in the New Year scenario, when it was created, it loaded this working column, and then it copied it into the model. And that's your starting point on the financials. So your financials starting point is your working. Now, if you want it, because sometimes your working is more up to date than your adopted. If you tell us, we can switch and load your adopted in, if there's a difference, of course. Actually, I can see already for this district, there was a difference. In 360 here, they budgeted 12 million, but in their working, they've reduced it to 11 million. So a lot of times there are differences between your working and your adopted. Generally, I think almost every district, we load your working into your model, and that is your starting point for your financials. Any questions about that? How your financials get into your model in a new year? It's really important to understand that, where these numbers originate from. We've had one district, I believe, that they started out, I think it's called zero cost or zero something budgeting, where they wanted this empty. And they just they didn't base it on their working. We have a way of clearing all these out with a zero as well, if that's the way you want to start. But almost every other district I've ever worked with, you start with your working. Now, let's say that you make a change in your working and you want to bring that into ESP. You can always go up here to Tools, Financials, Reload Adopted / Working Budgets. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Because remember, these blue columns are not updated every night. Oh, why am I getting that? All right, let me see. Sometimes ignore works. Yeah, okay. Your blue columns are not updated every night. They are static. These are only when you tell ESP, and this goes for the employees as well, and the salary plans. This is only when you tell ESP to reload. You have to manually go to Tools, Reload, and it will reload your blue columns. This goes for the financials, which is your working and your adopted, and your employees, blue columns. And that's why I spent a lot of time talking yesterday about the different colors and the different data sets. And of course, the actuals are updated every night. In my test database, unfortunately, I don't have any current actuals. I do have prior year actuals. And for some reason in my test database, these prior year labels are not showing up right. I think it's because I'm in a test database, but you guys should see your 3 prior years here of actuals. So the purple is updated every night, the blue is not. And if there's changes that have been made to the working that you want to bring into ESP, you have to go to Tools, Reload, Working, Adopted, and then you tell ESP where to look, where to go. And if you're familiar with columns in Visions, this tells ESP where to go get the adopted, where to go get the operating or working scenario, and then you have a few other options where to reload the actuals from. And then this, again, we talked about yesterday with the copy to model and recalculate. So if you had to change a bunch of changes to your working or one change to your working that you wanted to bring in ESP, you could reload manually and select this copy to model. This tells ESP reload the working, reload these working columns, and then copy it into the model. So in the beginning, you might need to do this quite a few times until you think your working is set in stone. And this also goes for the employees, which we'll talk about in a minute. So any questions about the working, how these values get started on the financials? And again, we're talking about only these budget items that are non-salary. I'll talk about those. Those are a little bit more complex. So it's a pretty simple concept. I've had a lot of people, and this goes back to a lot of where people have confusion. They'll say, "Oh, my working has changed. Do I need to delete, recreate my new year?" And this is where I'm trying to. This is why I created my PowerPoint. You don't need to delete it. You can reload. You can reload your employees and your financials. Open up Scenario Explorer. The reason why you choose your adopted as your, we call it the parent, is really the only thing that gets transferred. And I think I talk about that. So here's the prior year scenario. Excuse my kind of dumb graphics here. This is the adopted, really. It's your current year adopted. The only thing that gets transferred into your new year scenario is your assumptions, saved grid views, and your budget book layout, which we haven't talked too much about the saved grid views or budget book yet. But mostly the important thing is the assumptions, really. And we talked yesterday about the assumptions, all of your fixed costs, your supplemental pay, your medical benefits, everything that is on here, the assumptions tab. All of these with their factors got copied from your adopted. Don't want to save this. So that's why you choose your adopted. None of the employees, none of the financials got carried into the new year. All of that was reloaded fresh from IV. Salary plans, all of your retirement statuses, that all gets loaded fresh. Okay, so if your employees change or your working changes, you can just reload. You don't need to delete. The only reason I could see deleting is if you created, if you accidentally used the wrong scenario to create your new year, because then your assumptions might not be right. Any questions about that? Okay, because I get a lot of, I do get a lot of questions about, do I need to delete and recreate the new year scenario? So we talked about the financials. If you need to reload, it's easy to reload your financials. Now, if you look here, you will see a lot of deltas for the salaries. And that's because all of those assumptions that we have on the assumptions tab, because it also recalculates, they've been applied. So these values have changed from the working, because they do not come from the working column. They come from the employees tab. On the new year scenario, all of your employees are reloaded. I shouldn't say reloaded, loaded into the new year, into the blue columns, and copied into the model. You guys, please speak up if you have any questions. I'm not explaining something right. This is the first time I've loaded the employees on this grid, so it's taken us a second longer, and I'm loading all the employees. So when this New Year scenario was created at 9 o'clock, it went into Visions and pulled all of these fundings from Infinite Visions. And then it just copied them into the model. So that's how my employees get into the model for a new year. And So this gets into a deep discussion about, well, tomorrow, things are happening in visions. Tomorrow, today and tomorrow, people are getting let go or retiring. New people are being hired. Because the blue columns will not update. This is if you look down here in the bottom, again on the status line, this section right here tells you when the blue columns were downloaded, the last time the employees were manually reloaded. So as time marches on, this gets more and more out of date, which means your model gets more and more out of date. So your model was based on January 9th at 9/11 this morning. But of course, your actuals, like we discussed yesterday, let me show the actuals columns. They are being updated on a nightly basis. And like I discussed yesterday, you'll start to see new employees show up inactive, gray, because those are people that have been hired, mid-year hires. If an employee is no longer with the district, they are not automatically, nothing, like I said, nothing gets copied to the model. So they will not just disappear out of your model. The only way you would know that is they would have a line in the model, but their actuals, okay, my actuals did not load. That's right, my actuals did not load on this database. But if you show your actuals, you should see values in your actuals. So if Casey Anderson, if she gets let go, her actuals the next day will be empty, but her model will still exist. So it becomes a real dance of your employees changing. Do you need to update your model? And we'll talk about how to bring data into the model or how to inactivate later. But just understanding the relationship between these. And let's say you created the new year but you're not quite ready to work in it yet. Just like on the financials, you go to tools, employees, reload employees. The same concept as when you're reloading the financials. If you want to refresh your model, you can reload the employees and then click copy to model, just like on the financials. This will reload into the blue columns and then copy everything into the model. But just be careful. In the beginning, it's okay to do this because you haven't probably done any work in the model yet. You're just updating your model to be reflective of what's in Visions. But once you start making changes in the model, you will not want to do this anymore because this will overwrite your model. This is a mass copy. You can, when you get further along, you can just right click and individually copy just individual employees into your model. This is a mass copy over your model. So in the beginning, this might be what you want to do, but at some point you're going to want to stop doing the mass copies because you're overriding your model on these mass copies. So again, just remember that new employees will show up over here. And again, remember, make sure you're not showing your active flag on the scope or you won't see them. And then you have to decide if because maybe they're a replacement for somebody, or maybe they're a new position that needs to be budgeted for next year. I don't quite know how that works, but I guess you have to work with HR to find out do we need to budget for this new person next year? Are they a replacement? Is somebody retiring? Because a new person, you might want to inactivate the old person that's retiring and then keep the new person, bring in the new person, new employee into the model. Because the person that's retiring might be on a very high step as well. So their salary will be quite high, whereas the new person might be on a lower step. So there's a big dance that goes on between keeping your model updated with the actuals. But just remember the blue columns, as soon as they're loaded, they start to become stale. And you can look down here to see when was the last time the blue columns were updated. All right. Any questions about that, guys? Super important to understand. All right. So again, the only thing that comes from your prior year, which is your adopted, is the assumptions and some saved grid views and budget book. Everything else is reloaded fresh from Infinite Visions. We talked about all of your ERP stuff, working, adopted, employee, salary plans, budget elements, loaded into the blue and then copied into the model. And then every night your purple is updated as well. And then we talked about how to reload. You can reload the employees, reload the salary plans, and reload your working and adopted. So you don't need to delete your New Year scenario. A lot of people have done that. They say, oh, well, we have a lot of new employees, or we've changed our working. They delete the New Year scenario and then recreate it. But you really don't need to, because you can just reload. When you do want to delete a scenario, let's say I don't, well, I wouldn't want to delete my adopted, but if I did want to delete my New Year for some reason, you right click, delete scenario, and we make you type in everything between the single quotes here into this box, only because we want to make sure you really want to delete it. It's just a way, an extra step to confirm you really want to delete a scenario. Because once it's gone, I mean, we could bring a backup, get it from a backup, but we'd rather make sure you really want to delete the scenario. And, you know, in any kind of tree system like this, you can't delete, like I wouldn't be able to delete number 1 here because it has children. I would have to delete the children before I could delete number 1. Hopefully you're not deleting too many scenarios. But you can, it doesn't hurt anything. You can have as many scenarios as you want or as few scenarios as you want. Questions, anybody? So what happens in a new year? Assumptions, budget book, those get copied. Blue columns have your working, adopted, employee, salary plans. Let me show that real quick. On the salary plan tab, this gets used quite often because you're making changes to the salary plans, or you have a new salary plan. Just like on the other 2 tabs, tools, salary plans, reload salary plans. And again, you have the copy model set. Now, if you want to reload without copying, this goes for the financials or the employees. You know, if you want to just take a see what's going on in Visions without copying into your model, you can do that as many times as you want because you're not overwriting your model. Maybe you just want to update the blue columns just to see how they look before you copy, because you can always right click. This goes for the employees or the financials. Right click, copy plan from Infinite Visions. So if you want to reload first, see how it looks, and then copy it in, you can do that. This goes for the employees. If you want to just reload, of course, you have your actuals, right? So there really shouldn't be a lot of difference between your actuals and when you reload because it's within the same day if you were to reload. You can right click and there's a copy from Infinite Visions. And there's also, if I had data in my actuals, there would be a copy from actuals here. But we'll do that as training probably tomorrow. So you can either mass copy or individually copy. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but it's, from my experience, it's a big part of confusion for a lot of people. Questions? No? Okay. Hope I'm not on mute anymore. You guys can hear me, right? Somebody?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank
We can hear you.
All right, good. All right, we already talked about this. We'll get to, I'll talk about what a baseline is in a little bit. Remember that your blue and your purple are static. They're not, they're for reference only. The blue is updated on demand. The purple is updated daily, and you cannot edit the blue or the purple. So we talked about this. Okay, good. So did everyone that was creating a new year, did they get it done? Do you have any questions? So you can, after we're done training, or if you're in your production database still, you can go ahead and create your new year, because now you know that if you want to update your employees, you know how to do it. And just, I don't think I talked about this yesterday, but for the new users, especially when you have this open and you want to switch scenarios, just double click the scenario that you want to open. The one that is open is blue, and I think we have the asterisk next to it as well, just so you can quickly see which one you have currently open. And over here in the actual scenario on the main form, it tells you the name of the scenario, and also down in the bottom right, you have the name of the scenario. So after you right click and you say create new year, and it creates, it's going to pop up and you should have a new fiscal year scenario right here. And then there's an option for automatically open. It will automatically open into your new year scenario. And then you're ready to start working on your new year. So, all right. You guys are probably, I see it already. These were just reloaded. And one thing that you're going to have when you first reload your employees, it happens to almost every district, you're going to have a lot of cleanup with your employees in the beginning. Here's a good example where Melissa Lee, I'm gonna hide my actuals column real quick. So I added these actuals columns, and because of my test database, I don't have actuals. I want to hide this. When you want to hide an individual column, you can right click on it and click on hide. If you want to hide the entire data set, right? Because we talked about data sets, the model, the infinite visions, blue, or the purple. You can right click on this level and hide, and it will hide the entire data set, because those actuals are not beneficial to me. Going back to your employees changing every day, there might come a time where, because the blue is stale, you might want to hide your blue columns and only show your purple columns. Because again, these immediately become, the blue immediately becomes stale as changes are happening in visions. So you might want to just completely hide your blue infinite visions columns and just show your purple columns. But I noticed here in this, I'm sure almost everyone will have this, where this is a good example of where an employee probably got moved at some point from one account code to another account code, and the old position didn't get closed. In ESP, we don't, we just go and pull in everything, all the fundings for the current year. You can always right click on an employee and click on Infinite Visions Details. This is really useful. This will be, I think it works. Let me check. On my test database. So this goes and actually is a live look in Visions. So you can see she has 2 open positions. So more than likely, this would be where you would have to go and talk with HR because one of these probably needs to be closed. That's why she's 2.0 FTE. Remember, each position is 1.0, but her total FTE is 2.0. So you're going to spend a lot of time in the beginning cleaning. You have 2 options. You can clean them up in Visions and then reload into ESP and do the copy, the mass copy. That's probably the best way. They probably need to be cleaned up in Visions anyway. Or you could just right click on her and inactivate one of these positions in the model. So you're fixing it in the model, but you're not fixing the source of the problem in Visions. So again, just right click, Infinite Visions Details, and it will bring that window up. So I lost that window that I just had open. If you go up here to this toolbar, tool menu, go to window, this shows you all of the open windows that you have open, all of your windows that you have open in ESP. And it's a quick, easy way to bring a window back. Because a lot of times you'll have Scenario Explorer open, you'll have 2 or 3 of these. So you can just go to window and find the window that you want and it will bring it forward for you. But the right click Infinite Vision Details is a pretty cool trick. That way you don't have to switch over to your Infinite Visions and manually do a lookup. The right click Infinite Vision Details. Even the financials have that as well. I don't know if it works. I'm getting an error. I'll have to fix that. But even the financials, because we pull in the actuals, and this is where the actuals actually originate. So even for your budget items, you have the Infinite Visions lookup. But you'll use that a lot on the employees because you're going to spend time cleaning up your employees, getting rid of extra account codes that haven't been closed, and then you're going to reload and copy into your model for a while until you get your employees set right. All right. So let's talk about the toolbars up here. They're basically the same on each tab. There's a few differences we'll talk about. Just left to right here. These are your save icons. Let me, until you make a change in the grid, they are grayed out. As soon as I make a change, let me get my scope set to where I can make an easy change. I want to, let me explain what I'm doing. I want to look just at library books. And because I'm summed this way, I'm looking at everything summed up to the object. So this is library books 0430 across all funds, all functions, all centers. That's just the total across everything, the total of 0430 in my budget. I want to look at the individual account codes of what makes up that number. So I'm just going to put in 0430 in my object, and I'm going to drag it down to the bottom. I'm going to make sure I don't have any summing and click OK. Notice my scope toolbar changes. And now I have each individual account code that has dollars in it. Now, when I say it has dollars, it's not necessarily in the model. They could exist in the working, the adopted, or the actuals. And here's a good example of where the adopted is different than the working. So in the adopted, they had 5,000 in this account code, but in the working, they don't have it. So that's why there's no 5,000 in my model right here. Let me show you the freeze line real quick, because if you notice when I scrolled over, I lost the account code. I like for the account code column to stay here. When you put your mouse cursor right here, you'll see it changes to like a little lock symbol. And this is just like Excel. You can grab it and move it. It's the freeze line, and it will freeze there. So now when I scroll to the right, the account code stays there. So if you're doing a lot of scrolling left and right, I suggest a ultra wide monitor for working in ESP. That's what I use, and it's really helpful. Excuse me. So what I wanted to show was this toolbar menu item. As soon as I make a change, let's say I do want this $5,000 in my amount column here. Now remember, I still have this delta column that I added earlier. Okay, I'm done with that. I don't want it anymore. I'm just going to right click and hide it. But also I have, remember I moved my Infinite Visions working over here because I wanted to compare these two columns. I don't want that over here anymore. I want back to my default view. This toolbar button right here with the little refresh symbol, that will reset your column layout to the default. It got rid of my working, it moved my working, and it got rid of my delta column. But just be careful when you do that. Any things that you've moved or any columns you've moved around or delta columns, you're getting rid of those. So let's say currently I have $250 budgeted in this account code. I want to change that to 500. You have a new amount and variance column. We'll do this in training. So I want this number to be 500. So in the new amount, I put 500. But notice that as soon as I made a change, I have a little edit pencil next to what I changed, and this is now active because the grid detected a change. And so it knows that maybe I want to save it. And if you make a change and you don't know what it is, you can always look at this. It shows you your pending changes, and it tells me what I changed, the old value and the new value. So now I can save it. And when you make changes in ESP, most changes, you have to enter a note, because this is accounting software and we sleep at night and we might forget why we did something. So you have to add at least a 10-character note into here. And I can just say updating library books, or whatever the reason why you did that. And it has to be 10 characters. And as soon as you type the 10th character, you can then click the apply button. This is called the process log. And by default, it doesn't show up, but I suggest that you do have it show up on saves, just so that you can see. It takes a couple of seconds. It has to go through some machinations. If you go to view, where's it at? Show log when applying. So that's what made it pop up. It'll just pop up and show you what it's doing, and then it'll go to the back. So that way it lets you know because sometimes it takes a lot longer than that. And that way it lets you know ESP is working. So now you can see that this number changed to 500. And now my save icon, they're back to gray. The next two are just your normal print, copy, cut, paste. You can do a lot of copying and cutting when you're putting numbers in. You can even, speaking of cut and pasting, this is kind of a new feature. This toolbar button right here, this is in the scope toolbar button. Notice it's gray. So let's say I have an account code that I want to paste. You select an account code, and this can be from, like, if you can copy it in Visions, wherever there's an account code, press Control C. Notice that ESP detects that it has an account code on the Windows clipboard. So this is really beneficial if you're in a spreadsheet and you want to come into ESP, and that way you don't have to manually open the scope and type it all in. As long as you can copy an account code, it will realize that, and then you paste it, and notice what it did. It put that full account code automatically into your scope for you. And Scott, you might have to help me out. I can't, because it's something we've added where the shift key, if you hold the shift key, I'm trying to remember, it will ignore, I believe, ignore the summing. We just added the shift key and control key. Yeah, if you hold the shift key and paste it in, it, what did it do? Oh, it got rid of the object, but left everything else, and it gets rid of the summing. The control key and click it, it sums everything. So play with that. It's really it's really convenient once you start using it, especially if you're going back and forth between the employees and the financials, and you want to look at one account code. So control key sums everything, shift key unsums it, but it also gets rid of the object. So a lot of times you'll want to look at all the objects within that account code. And then nothing, no control or shift, just puts in the account code. Okay. So that's copy and paste. This is to add a budget item, or if you're on the employees, it's to add a budgeted position on the employees. So if I wanted to add a new account code here, you just click the green plus, and you're given a box you have to give it, you can edit the account code here. So if I have a new account code I want to add, but I want it at say a different center, just change the center, you add the amount, whatever the amount is you want, and you have to add a note, adding new library books, click add. And you can add multiple before you save. All right, so this saves you a little bit of work. You can make quite a few changes before you have to save the grid. So this is my process log popping up. Now this is going to go away, this one that I just added. I have to figure out what that is. It's going to go away because it's not in my scope. And this is another source of confusion I get from people. They'll say they've added a budget item, but you have to remember, if you don't add it to this scope, it's not going to show up. So yes, it's added, but it's in a different scope. So just be aware when you're adding budget items or you're moving employees, I always recommend that where you're adding, have that in your scope as well. That way you can see it show up, and you'll know, you can confirm that it's where you want it and the amount is correct. So when you're moving employees or you're adding budget items, have where your target, we call it the target, have that in your scope as well so that you can manually see it show up and you know it worked the way you wanted it to. And you can delete. This would be if I had the one selected that I just created, you could delete. You can only delete employees and budget items that you have manually added. You cannot notice that it is not red for this budget item because this budget item came in from the working. All you can do is you could zero it out, but you cannot delete it. Same for the employees. Oh, see, that's a good example where my scope is locked and I switch tabs and now it's gonna, I should have unlocked it before I switched tabs because it carries over this object 430, which obviously has no employees in it. So something to be aware of when you're switching tabs. I'm going to take this object out and hopefully there's some employees in this scope. Nope, just my luck. Hopefully you guys know your employees. Oh, this is, so I cleared the scope completely and I clicked OK and this pops up. This will pop up when you have a fully empty scope. Generally it's okay now, but it used to take a long time to load because it's loading thousands of rows. If you have a small district, it doesn't take that long. But the more rows that you're loading, the longer it takes. But we have sped things up quite dramatically. If you say no, then it pops the scope form back up and you can narrow your scope down. But I always suggest keeping your scope kind of narrow so that the grid loads a little bit quicker. If you look down here in the bottom, this number right here, 1722, that's telling me the number of rows, well, the number of records that it's loading, not rows particularly. But each one of these is a record. So there's 1,722 records, each record being an employee's position here. So the green plus and the X work the same on the employees here. If I want to add a budgeted position, which we'll do tomorrow, I could just use the green plus. You won't be able to delete any of these employees. The only employee you'll be able to delete are ones that the budgeted positions that you're going to create tomorrow. You'll be able to delete those. But once they're in as a funding that came in from Visions, you're not allowed to delete them. You have to right click and activate. That's the only way to get them out of the model is inactivation. So you cannot delete. The refresh, that's if you've made some changes and the grid doesn't seem, it should refresh on its own, but if it doesn't refresh, you can always manually refresh. This is if it's running a process. Sometimes you can stop it if it seems like it's taking too long. Generally, you won't need that too much. This is when you're on the financials and you add salary dollars in, it will try to calculate your grid, the fixed cost for you in the grid. Sometimes you want to see that, sometimes you don't. Let's say you add $1,000 to substitutes. The grid, in the grid on the financials, it will create budget items like PERS, Social Security, workers' comp. It will create that in the grid for you. This turns that off and on. This is the delta column that we talked about earlier. You know, a good example would be, let's say these are the work days from IV. You can drag it over to the work days of the model. So you put your columns next to each other that you want to compare. Left click the right column and then just click here. Come on. Let me refresh. So here's a good example where I might need to refresh. Oh, there we go. Oh, it added a bunch of them because I clicked too fast. But there's also a couple of other deltas. This is just a number delta column. This is another reason why you want to make sure you pare your scope down so that when you add delta columns or you add extra columns, they load a little, the grid will load a little quicker. I'm really surprised it's taking this long, but I've never added 4 delta columns like this either before. So of course there are no deltas, right? Because when I created this new year, it loaded these employees' work days and copied them into the model. So I wouldn't expect there to be any deltas right now because the model is a fresh copy of the infinite visions. So I'm going to get rid of these real quick. Right click, hide, right click. Actually, the quicker way is, remember the column reset. Click here to reset the columns. I'll get rid of my delta columns and move my infinite visions working column work days back. But I wanted to show you a couple of other deltas. So I want to compare these two columns, for example, the annual rate and the total wages. If you right click, there is this calculated submenu. And you have a few options here. The toolbar icon up here, that is just the delta value. But if you want to see a percent, you could add the percent difference. You could also do the delta value and percent. And this pops up just asking you, what do you want to call the column? Usually you can just accept the default, click OK. And of course, there's no difference right now either. But this would, let me pick one that shows a difference. So you put the two columns next to each other, right click on the right column, delta value percent, give it a name. These get used quite often, these delta columns, when you're comparing. So it's good to know how they work. So this tells me the difference between these two columns, not just the dollar, but also the percent. This is a good thing to use. Let's say you go to the salary plans, you give everyone a COLA. You might then want to come to the employees and put their old wages first next to their wages, their annual rate, and then the new annual rate, and then do a delta percent. And then you can make sure everybody's annual rate went up by the percent that you put on the salary plans. So those delta columns come in really handy and they get used a lot. The plus and minus we talked about yesterday, it collapses and expands the tree. These 3 are for sorting. And let's say you do a delta column and you want to sort, you can sort on any column. You have ascending and descending. I'm going to sort descending. You have to be careful when you have the tree laid out like this because it's going to retain the tree structure and only sort within that tree structure. So be careful when the best time to use uh, sorting is usually when you're full summed. I'm going to pair my scope down a little bit. Fully summed. Now, um, like yesterday, when you fully sum the employees, it gives you just one long list of your employees alphabetically by default. Mine does seem to be running a little slow this morning. So now, because I'm fully summed, I'm not um, broken out by any structure, and I'm sorted on this delta column. You can, because a lot of times people email me, hey, why aren't my employees? What order are they in? And then we look, and you can see the little down arrow. So I'm sorting on this column descending, and that's why when you're ready to get rid of the sorting, you can click here, and that will get rid of your sorting, and it will take your employees or whatever whatever your tab you're on and put it back to alphabetical. So if your employees or your objects on the financials look weird, look for sorting. A lot of times it's just the sorting that's causing your grid to look weird. If you have a problem clicking and dragging the columns, you can left click to select it, and you can use these left and right arrows to move them left or right. If you want to add, let's say you're way over here on the right and you want to add this, you want to move this column over into the model. Sometimes the best thing to do is grab it and drag it all the way over to the left. What that does is it moves it as the first column. Then it's a little bit closer. Then you can click and drag it into the model. Oh, that reminds me. You also have a top level freeze line. I think by default it's because you'll notice you have a total line at the top. By default, it's the second line, but you can always move this down and it will freeze it. Not so much on the employees, but you might use that on the financials or the salary plans. Okay, before we start talking about the rest of these buttons right here, let's just take a quick 2-minute break, and we'll get started in just a second. And please have some questions for me if you need it. Okay. Any questions so far, anyone? There are a lot of toolbar buttons, but once you start using them, you'll have them down pat. All right, I'm going to reset my column layout. Okay, so these two toolbar buttons, these are important to know. This is called scenario recalc. When you make changes in ESP, there's a lot of math that goes on behind the scenes. If you were to go to the assumptions and add a supplemental pay or change PERS rates, they do not, and you save it, they do not automatically get applied here to the employees until you do what's called a scenario recalc. Then what ESP does is we take everything back to what was loaded from Visions, and then we reapply all of your assumptions. We reapply all of these fixed costs, the benefit plans, we reapply stepping and COLA. And the reason why is because that gives ESP the flexibility of being able to, because we preserve everything before you do it. We preserve everything that's loaded from Visions. That way, if you give everybody a 4% COLA, if you change your mind and want to change it, or just want to see what a 5% COLA looks like, you can change it. It doesn't bake the 4% in. You have to leave the 4% in here because we take everything back to the original and then reapply the COLAs, reapply all the factors. And that does not happen until you do what's called a recalc. And this goes along with this flag over here. Notice it's red right now. But let's say I've added COLAs, I've added some stepping, or I've changed some rates on my assumptions. And I want that applied, I want to get that applied to the employees. And I also want to roll that up into the financials. So if you make a change here on the employees, you change a person's work days, that's obviously going to change their annual rate. That doesn't get rolled up into the financials tab until you do this recalc as well. Because it just, well, maybe we'll get to a point one day when computers get faster where as soon as you do that and make a save, it can do all that math behind the scenes. But right now, it can't be done. So when you do want to recalculate everything, you want to recalculate all of your assumptions and your COLAs and your stepping, and you want it to roll into the financials tab, you click this toolbar button, recalc entire scenario. And it brings up your calculate form. And if you've made changes to anything that would affect the employees, such as the salaries or stepping or any of those fixed costs, you would want to make sure you click this toolbar button too, recalculate employees. I'm going to go ahead and do this. So this is recalculating the scenario, which is the financials, and also it's recalculating the employees. Probably take about a minute. Some districts are faster. A lot of it depends on how many assumptions it is applying. And this is why earlier I said it's good to show this form, the view, show log when applying, so that you can see it's busy doing something. You can't do a lot when you're saving or recalculating. You can switch tabs, but it is real laggy because it's trying to do a lot of work and also trying to bring data for the grid. So it's a good time when you recalculate, maybe go get a cup of coffee, get a drink of water. But it's doing a lot of checks. It's doing a lot of recalculations. It's checking for balances. There's a lot that goes on. You can see each one of these lines is it's actually doing something. Here it's creating all of those fixed costs. And just remember, it's taking everything back to the loaded values and then reapplying everything. You get a ding. I don't know if you guys heard that ding or not. Well, yeah, you probably did. So now notice my flag is green. So green means you're fully recalculated. Down here in the status line again, it will tell you the last time that you recalculated. Because that's another question I get often where people tell me they've made changes, but they don't see the changes reflected on the financials. And the first thing I look at is their flag. Because a lot of times people make changes and they do not recalculate. And those changes, most of the time, will not be reflected on the financials until you recalculate your scenario. A lot of times when you make changes, let me make a change. You're given the opportunity in the save form to recalculate. For districts that have multiple people working in, you can limit it to a current scope so that if somebody else is working in a different scope, because if you're sharing ESP duties, you generally want to be keep your work separate. You don't want to be working in the same scope. You sure don't want to be working trying to edit the same object or the same employee. So you want to use your scope to isolate just what you're supposed to be working on, and the other person is isolated to what they're working on. And then this way, if you recalculate, it will it will just recalculate the current scope. So that if you do recalculate, it stays within your scope. And this is the recalculate scope toolbar button. If you're on the employees and you want to calculate just the employees, you could do, if you made changes to the stepping and COLAs, you could just recalculate the employees and it would not roll into the financials. Generally, probably a good idea to just go ahead and recalculate the entire scenario. As soon as you make a change, I'll change this guy's work days to 190, save it. So there's the I could recalculate the employees right now if I wanted to. And again, this is something where you can make quite a few changes before you have to save, so that you don't have to sit through this each time. You can make multiple changes. And again, you can see just changing the work days causes a lot of math. But now his days have changed, and notice my flag went because after the save, it's going to refresh as well. Notice my flag is red. So almost any minor change you make will tell you, will turn the flag red and tell you that something has changed. We're not fully recalculated. These values did change accordingly, but they have not rolled up into the financials. I would have to recalculate the scenario to have these new dollars roll up into Object 0111 on the financials. So understanding when to recalc is really important. Before the next toolbar button I'm going to get to here is the Save to Spreadsheet. Any grid that you're on in ESP, you have a Save to Spreadsheet button. Just going to click it real quick. It takes your grid and just spits it out to Excel. is a really nice feature. So if you need to email HR and ask them questions, all you have to do is save to spreadsheet. But before you save to spreadsheet, it's recommended, or do any kind of reports, have a green flag first, so that you're sure that whatever you're exporting is updated. In this particular case, it is, because when you make the change here, it did update these correctly. Notice you have colors in here, because this guy I noticed just went red. And what red means is that it's a higher number than what is in Vision's columns, which means you're higher than what they currently are. It's just a quick way to see, oh, this is higher than, if you look over here, the fixed cost total. It was black because everything matched. But now that I changed it, I added 4 work days from 186 to 190. So now his fixed costs will be higher. Back to this, so this one will save the spreadsheet with the colors. If you don't want the colors, if you go to the reports menu here, you have a couple of other options. You have, so spreadsheet formatted is this one, this toolbar icon. Spreadsheet formatted with outline. It, well, if we had more of a tree, you would have your outline broken out over here on the left. So you could collapse. You could collapse it or expand it over here on the left. You have, if you don't want the colors, you could do unformatted. And it is a little quicker because it doesn't have to fill each cell with colors. It showed up on my other screen. And then you have raw data. In this case, it's the same. But if I had the tree hierarchy in there, it would unpivot all of that and just spit it out individual rows like this. So play around with that, see which one you like. But any grid in ESP, there's the save to spreadsheet. Even let me show you, right click, Infinite Vision details. I have to see what's causing that error. Even this grid has the save to spreadsheet. So this might be a good example of when you need to email HR and ask why there's, which position needs to be closed. You could just save this to spreadsheet and then do whatever you want to do with it. This is a scenario audit, or I'm sorry, employee audit. And I'm sorry, not audit, validation. And what this does is this goes through each employee and it does like a validation on employees. It looks for over 1 FTE. It looks for maybe employees that don't have an insurance status or a PERS status. It does just some validations that that we think are necessary, but it also does that when you recalculate the scenario. So you don't need to run that too often if you're recalculating. It will come back and tell you if you have employees over 1.0 FTE or any problems that you have with your employees. It will give you a warning. This is if you want to save notes. So if maybe you want to remember something about a particular employee, you can write, well, you can just click this note, add note. You can say, I need to do something with this employee, blah, blah, blah. Click add. And it adds a little note icon right there. Then you can double click it and read what you wrote, your notes. You can even attach documents if you needed to. So if you're working with other people, this might be a good thing to use just for communication purposes. This is Crosstab, which we'll probably talk about because it's kind of detailed. We'll talk about it. These two actually, Crosstab and Budget Book. This is for reporting. We'll probably talk about these on Friday. This toolbar icon is for administrators. It's where you can set up individuals to work in responsibility centers. You can control what they see. So generally, most people won't spend too much time in here unless you're an admin and you're maybe working with some of managers. You won't really need to be in here. If you do, let us know and we can work more specifically on that with you. This is a big one. This shows your budget elements. So all of your elements that you see, mostly on the financials page, they get loaded from Visions. Collapse everything up. So all of your elements, we call them elements, get loaded. Let me expand the objects here. These get loaded from Visions. And this is how ESP knows per district which elements to show in the grid, which elements exist in IV. And they get loaded fresh every night. These were loaded when I created the new year as well. But all of these should look familiar. You won't spend a lot of time in here. If you create, let's say there's a new object, the best way to do it is to add it in Visions, and then you can manually reload your budget elements. Or if you don't, they will automatically load that night. When it runs the actuals, it will go out and pull in all of your budget elements. So if you create a new account code in Visions, it will show up here the next day. To reload, you go to Tools. Let's see, it's been a while since I've done it. Reload budget elements. So you can either manually do it or ESP will automatically do it at night. And then you'll have it available in your scope. You'll have it available to use in ESP.
Tim, can I just clarify something?
Yes.
Are you saying that if we create a new account code in iVisions, we can add that to the model just by that account code?
You mean a full account code?
Yes. What if there was a new, and I don't know if this is particular exactly what you were talking about, but what if we create a new account code? Can we add that specific account code and bring it into the model?
No. No.
Okay.
Well, it kind of depends on, you can reload and it will bring it. Yes. Well, yeah. I guess it just depends. If you're talking about a specific, like you're talking about the full account code.
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, you could reload like you're working, and then just right click copy to the model.
Just that one account
Just
code.
that one, yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's the same as, let's say a new employee shows up with a brand new account code,
Yes.
right? It's the same thing. Actually, the actuals would show up, same as on the financials. It would show up in the actuals. And
Yeah.
then you could right click, copy. I don't have actuals, but if I did, it would be right here, copy from Infinite Vision's actuals.
and that would bring that particular
Just
new
that
employee
particular,
into
yes,
the model. Okay.
right, right. If I were to go to, remember I changed her working days here. If I wanted to bring her back in from Infinite Visions, I could right click, copy funding from Infinite Visions, and would bring just that one line in. So it's the same if it's a new employee or a new budget item, you could bring it in.
Okay, thanks.
If you don't bring it in, you could always just add it manually as well. And for an employee, you would want to copy them in. But for if it's a budget item that shows up, if a budget item shows up in an actuals, you can right click. So here now I have copy from, well, there's the adopted is 0 here, so that's why that one's grayed out. But copy from the working or copy from the actuals. So that's how you bring in individual account codes.
Okay, thanks.
Our employees, yeah. If you didn't want to do that, you could always just manually add it as a budget item. But actually, yeah, because if it's something that's newly added, it won't be in your working, it would be in your actuals. Just like tomorrow, if a person gets hired today, they'll show up in my list here grayed out. They won't be in the blue, but they will be in the purple column. And again, you won't see them unless you're showing the actuals. I don't have any actuals, but make sure you're showing the actuals data set so people that are coming in or so that you can see what's going on in Visions on a day-to-day basis. But when you're going back to this budget elements, this is just for reloading new elements, not account codes, full account codes. Let's say you create a new, like 2 years ago, there was the new Oregon PFMLI, I think is what it's called. So everybody was wanting to know how to bring that into ESP so that they could use it to create a new calculation, a new payroll calculation. So it had to be added first to the object. It was a 200. And I'll explain when we talk about a little bit about Budget Book about the hierarchy here. But
Tim, I have
yes.
a question.
Okay.
When you reload the budget elements, does it keep your narrative?
I would hope so.
Okay.
Scott, are you available? I'm going to say yes, but I will double check. I can't imagine. I don't think we reload the narratives when we reload the budget elements.
Okay, and what about the fiscal year notes? So if you're in, midway and you've entered a bunch of fiscal year notes, but you need to add. Nope. It doesn't.
I'm going to say I'm 99% sure. I can't imagine we would overwrite those. Because if it did, it would overwrite them every night. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, because okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I was trying to find that PFMLI or whatever it was called. I don't know what it's called on. Oh, here it is. PFMLI or LE, whatever. So people had to create O230 in Visions because we could not use that on the financials or on the assumptions to create this. Let me go to the assumptions real quick. You know, people wanted to start budgeting for that that 0230, and it could not be created over here under the mandatory costs or payroll costs, excuse me, or APC. This one right here. It could not be used here in this calculation until it was an actual object that existed in ESP. Down here for the result, you know, calculate this value on all the employees and then stick the result in 0244, which is executive reimbursement. That doesn't make any sense to me, but it couldn't be used in ESP until it was created in Visions and then brought into ESP. So most of the time you're not doing too much of that, but if you do need a new element, you can change it or add it here. You can manually add it if you need it right now, immediately. You can manually add it, but hopefully you'll add it pretty close to what's in Visions so that at night when it reloads, it will see that it's the same one that you added and it will merge it. But I recommend adding it in Visions first and then reloading and let it just automatically bring in. All right. Again, just like any other window, you have a save to spreadsheet right here that you might want to use here. All right. This opens that process log that we talked about. So if you need to go back and look at it for some reason, probably not, but it's there if you need it. This is the Scenario Explorer, which you will use a lot. To do anything scenario related. We have added, and this is for you guys that have used ESP before, you now can change scenarios by right-clicking here. It's only going to show you the scenarios in your fiscal year, or the current fiscal year that you're in. So I only have one scenario. But it will show you all of your scenarios, so you don't have to open Scenario Explorer to change scenarios. You can easily do it right here. And you can lock and unlock the scenario. You can update this label. Remember, the label is what's in the parentheses. And you should definitely use those to help you remember what is in each scenario. You can recalculate. I don't know what that does, but let's see. This is called the audit. If you want to, let's go back to the employees for a second. We use this quite often. People will say, Tim, I don't know how this happened. So first thing we usually look at is the item audit. So you select an item, you click the green, and it basically does, well, what doesn't it? Let me try this again, hang on. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it, but it does an audit because everything that you do, we save it as a set. They're called sessions, and we can go back and see what happened. So here's where I changed this account code, Alan Ambrosia, from 186 to 190, a difference of 4 days. So don't think you can do something and get away with it, because we'll find it. Just kidding. But no, it's good to, that's why when you get prompted for the comments, don't get, because you can, let me show you this. Oh, I was clicking on the wrong one. That's why. Right click, show audit. There it is. This is if you have it, you have full audit, which shows all the changes in the scenario, or this green check, which is current item audit, or right click, show audit. And that shows the audit just for this object. In this case, an employee funding. It'll tell you what happened. But that's why you don't want to get, you want to use those comments somewhat correctly. So that if we do have to go back and look and see why something was done, we can have a good understanding of why. But speaking of comments, there is a shortcut to adding comments. You double click and it will remember your last comment of the, if you're changing the same object, if you're on the same tab, making a similar change. This is what I used last time. So you just double click and it will quickly add your last comment. So you don't have to, if you're making a lot of changes to the same object, you can use the same comment just by double clicking. I know it's annoying. A lot of people get annoyed, but when we have to go back and look at an audit, those comments can be helpful. So feel free to use the audit or either one of these audits if you're wondering what happens sometimes. So I just made, this is going back to this refresh here. I made a change. I changed Elizabeth's work days, but I realized I don't want to save the change. I could type 186, because notice my save icon is active. I could either put 186 back in. A lot of times you have to put the number in and then click away before it'll recognize it. So notice it went inactive again. So it got rid of the change. I'm going to put that back in for a minute. If I've made changes, and this is just kind of like when you're in Word or Excel and you make changes, but you don't want to save them, you click close and you can just, in this case, you refresh. Of course, I have a lot of employees, and it refreshing will wipe away any changes as well. And even if you make a change and you go to switch tabs, it will say, do you want to save these changes before you switch tabs? Generally, it's best to either save them or refresh and get rid of them before changing tabs. But notice I changed tabs because I said don't save. When I came back, the change is still there, the 200, and it still wants to save. So I'm just going to refresh. I thought it was supposed to prompt you and say you've made changes. Do you want to save them before you refresh? So let me double check that. A lot of times you want to make sure that you save your changes. Okay. This is to help you with selecting columns, which we haven't talked about yet, but let's talk about those real quick. Adding columns. Again, let's say I want to add something to the left of fixed cost here, a column. So I can either right click on the right side of total wages or right click on the left side of fixed cost total. Then you have a lot, especially here on the financials, you have a lot of columns, maybe close to 1,000 columns, because you have your different data sets, and then within each data set, you have submenus. List we talked about yesterday. This is when it's like a pull down list for an employee. So like PERS rates or PERS status are their work calendar, which we looked at yesterday. You could add those here in the grid. And the reason why you would want to add them is either to look at them for reference, or you could, if you need to make changes, add the column, and then you can make the changes here in the grid. Pay component, these are the pay components, the supplemental pay that's set up on the assumptions tab. So if you add a new supplemental pay, it will show up in this list. These are the current pay components I have set up on the assumptions tab. So if I want to see how much employees are getting for cell phone, I'll just add the cell phone column. So just remember, they have to be set up on the assumptions tab first, recalculate, and then it'll be available here in the grid. And there's 0. So nobody in this, and remember, this would be a case where it's 0, but I always remember what your scope is. It could be that just nobody in this function is getting cell phones. Or it could be I don't have it set up right, which is probably a better explanation. But if something looks weird, always make sure your scope. Maybe it just so happens that nobody in function 1111 has the cell phone stipend. Okay, I'm going to go back and look. So we're back to model. We talked about list, pay components, position. So this is not their position. This is the position, well, this is the position that they are attached to. We talked yesterday about calendar, work calendar. You could also add the work days of the work calendar, or the work days, work hours of the position that they're assigned to. Salary plan. So these are all of the columns associated with the salary plan. I think one. So let's say you want to look at what the grade is called. Because right now, if you look over here in the plan code column, it just says 7612. But you might not know what 1 is, and you want to know the name. You could add these ID columns. No, actually, I added the wrong column. This will be, I think it'll say just 1. Seems really slow today. This normally should not take this long. I'll have to look into this, so I'll speed it up for tomorrow. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. ID is usually the number, where name, let me go back to model, salary plan. Salary plan full name. And you also have, you might want to use the IV name as well. So just different columns here, play around with it. See what, because you want to make sure that you're looking, you understand what 7612 is. So you can add the IDs, you can add the IV name, you can add the full name. I don't know, I'm not sure what description is, but you can add different columns here to help to make sure you think, you're looking at the right salary plan. Status is just check boxes. You're probably won't use these too much. Let me show you this one, active. All of these are going to be active. Active just means that they're active in ESP. If you want to take them out of ESP, you can just uncheck this box. And that will notice that they went gray with a line through them. This is the same that you would see tomorrow, if an employee gets hired today, they're going to show up. They won't be active. If you wanted to take Rosemary out of the budget, this is how you do it. You just inactivate them because you cannot delete her. So you inactivate them. And it leaves their numbers here, but they are out of the budget. They're not, their values are taken out of the budget. So employees you don't want to budget for, you just inactivate them. You can either show the column and do it, or the right click. Well, now it's active because I've inactivated her. But if you wanted Sarah out of the budget, right click, inactivate. It's the same as this checkbox.
Tim, how do you add that column? Where's that found?
Right click, go to model, status.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Most of these other ones you probably won't need to use. Don't feel overwhelmed by these columns. There are a lot, but you really only use a handful. Fixed cost is one that you might use, and we'll talk about this. We're kind of running short on time, but let's talk about this real quick. Let me refresh my grid. Now I've added some columns. I don't want them there anymore. I'm going to reset my layout. I am going to refresh my grid as well because I don't want to save her being inactive. I want to talk about this real quick for the last 8 minutes while we're talking about employees and how we get from how these columns flow from left to right here in the grid. And I don't have my benefits set up, but just presume that there are benefits. I'm sure all of you guys have benefits in your grid. So let's start with working left to right here. We know that the annual rate, because we talked about this yesterday, comes from the salary plan. The salary plan that this person is on, 76,415, we know and I can use the tooltip, the hourly rate of the salary plan times 8 times 186 to give us this number right here. So the annual rate column is just their salary plan. Originates just from their salary plan. That's their base salary. I don't know what you call it, but it's their main salary. Does not include any supplemental pay components. In between annual rate and total wages would be any supplemental pay. Where'd that document go? So that's what this document here, I know it looks kind of gnarly, but if you notice here, total cost, this is how you get, and this is the cost total that we're talking about here. And again, all of these are editable, so that's why they don't match up exactly. But we're talking about this column here. How do we get to this last column? It's a culmination of their annual rate plus supplemental pay plus the fixed cost plus their benefits plus any supplemental pay that might be a benefit to get to the cost total. So it starts off with their total salary, which in my grid is total wages. That's made up of their annual rate that comes from the salary plans, plus any supplemental pay that we talked about. So if I right click, I go to the model. Remember, you have this pay component submenu, and these are all of the supplemental pay components that are created. So I'm just going to click, let's see, I'll just add one for right now. It won't take too long. Add cell phone back in here, even though I know it's 0. So anybody that's getting cell phone, it would be their annual rate plus the cell phone, and that's their total wages. And the reason why you have a total wages, these are the dollars that they are getting, because all of these fixed costs, which is the next column, it's calculated on their total wages. And that's what this is saying. Annual rate plus any of their salary, supplemental pay, plus any of the true supplemental. There's 2 types, which we'll discuss when we get to the assumptions. But that comes out to their total pay, which on my grid is total wages. Because these fixed costs, this is the basis for the fixed cost. Remember the payroll cost. You put your mouse cursor over there. And then this, because that 20,000 is all of their payroll costs, just added up together. If you wanted to show each individual payroll cost, you can. If you right click, go to model, you have this fixed cost submenu. And then you'll notice you have all of those fixed costs that we saw in the tooltip. I'm just going to click add all. So if for some reason you need to see the individual calculations on the fixed cost, you could add these columns. If not, just use the tooltip. As you can see, the more columns you add, the more you have to scroll to the right. So now here's the total wages, which is their annual rate plus any supplemental pay to get to the total wages. And then on these total wages, you have these individual payroll costs calculated on this total wages. This column just gives you a percent. So 20,000 is about 24% of their total wages. This is just to give you an idea of the percentage. And then the fixed cost total, which is all of these added up. That if you select cells, click and drag, if you look in the bottom left, it will give you a sum of what those values add up to. So I clicked and dragged and I see 10,716. Yes, that's what we have here, 10,716. You can also use the control key to select different cells, and it adds those numbers up down here at the bottom. So that if they're not next to each other, you can just use the control key. Same in Excel. So does everybody understand how we're going from left to right here? Annual rate plus supplemental pay gives you all of your wages. And then payroll costs calculated on those wages. Then after all of that, which is all like taxable type stuff, then you have your medical benefits. I'm sorry that mine is blank. I will try to fix that. And see why nothing is being calculated. So then you're going to have your, let me go back to my document real quick. So we have your salary plus your fixed cost plus benefits. So this column, the benefits column, is directly related to the medical benefits. But you also know that I can't think of one off the top of my head. There's some supplemental pay that is also categorized as a benefit. That's why there's a benefits and a benefits total. I think HSA maybe, that might be one. because it's dollars that you contribute to the employee, but it's not taxable to the employee. So that's why it's not included in their total wages. It's dollars that you need to account for, but you don't want to calculate payroll cost on them. And then that gives you this cost total. So this is the total cost of this employee to the district. You won't see this number on the financials tab because all of these roll up to different account codes. So this number really might not be that beneficial, but this is why it exists. It is just a summation of all the dollars, the district are going to have to pay for that employee. That gets you to the cost total. So if you look at this document and follow it on the grid, that will help you understand how we're getting to this cost total and help you understand these different columns and how they're created. And this is why I was saying, like, if you make a change to Social Security on the assumptions, you have to save and recalculate, or these values would not update until you recalculate. As you can see, it has to do a lot of math to each one of these employees to calculate. Okay, any questions, guys, about this? One last thing, let me just finish up here real quick. This is find. This is, you'll probably use it on the employees. This toolbar icon is if they already exist in the grid. So if I want to find somebody named Smith, let's just see if there's a Smith. I click here, and it's just like find in Windows. Smith. Okay, there is a Smith. So it'll just take you directly to whatever you type in here. If you were looking for a number or something, you could click entire grid and it will search the entire grid. But by default, it's just a tree. Let's say I'm looking for somebody who's not in the grid, but I know they exist, but they're not in this scope. You use this find feature. This will look for somebody regardless of your scope. So I'll put Smith back in. You can use wildcards. And what that does is it actually clears your scope. And now notice you have the word Smith in your scope. And it's going to find anybody named that has the word Smith in their name. So it tells me everybody with the name Smith, regardless of my scope now. So this is a way of finding employees. If you don't know the account code that they're in, you can just use that to find it. Your grid's in a kind of a weird state now. We call it a context state. When you want to get out of it and get back to the grid that you had or the scope that you had, you use this toolbar button right here to revert back. It clears the Smith out of there and takes you back to the scope that you had. And then the last toolbar button is the Life Preserver. This starts Team Viewer. So when you need me to help you, me or Scott to help you, you can click this button and it launches it's a third-party program called Team Viewer. And then we see it show up on our screen. It says, hey, this client needs some help. And then this allows me to see your screen. We can either talk through TeamViewer or I can give you a call. Most of you have used this with me already. Okay, so that's it for the day. Tomorrow we'll start I hope everybody has a new year and we can start working in the grids, doing things, moving employees, adding budgeted positions. You should have a document that we're going to use. Let me look at the name of it. ESP Intro Training. Everybody should have that. We've already talked about a lot of it, but tomorrow we'll actually go through it and start doing some actual work within it. So any questions, feel free to email me. We're here the rest of the day. If not, I'll see everyone tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.